All right, today we moved on from rounding to the nearest 10. We moved into rounding with the nearest 100. So there are a few differences with that, but basically the same process as when you're rounding to the nearest 10. So on the homework tonight, they just had different numbers that they have to round to the nearest 100, and the hundreds go from 0 all the way to 1,000 on their paper. The trickiest ones probably for them, even though they're really not so tricky once you think about it, is what to do with the 2-digit numbers whenever you're rounding to the nearest 100. So if you have a 2-digit number like 74 and 27, you're either going to round to 0 or 100, because all 2-digit numbers are going to be anything less than 100. So for these, I just have them think about the halfway point between 0 and 100 is 50. And so if I'm 27, I'm on this side of the 50, so I'm going to be at a 0. And if I'm at 74, I'm on this side of 50, so I'm closer to 100. So today in class, like a few of them, we had to draw this 0 and 100 out and mark the 50 so they could actually see which side the 74 goes on and which side the 27 is, and then seeing if it's closer to 0 or closer to 100. So the 2-digit, you can't really use that much of a little process of underlining anything. It's more about just thinking, does it fall 50 or less or 50 or more? All right, moving on to the 3-digit numbers, which is mostly what they're going to see. If we had 746 and we're rounding to the nearest 100, we have to look at the hundreds place and we see that there's a 7. So the 7 looks right next door at the 4, and the 4 is 4 or less, so we let it rest. So 4 tells a 7 to just stay a 7, and then everything behind it becomes a 0. The biggest thing to remind them is when you're rounding to the nearest 100, this ones place, it doesn't matter. We're not worried about it. We're not looking at it. We're just focused on the 100 and what the neighbor tells it to do. So 746 would round to the 700. All right, 489. So we're rounding to the nearest 100. So we underline the hundreds place. We have a 4. It looks right next door and sees the 8. And the 8 is our 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 5 or more, raise the score. So an 8 tells the 4 to raise up. So a 4 would raise up to a 5. And then everything else becomes a 0. So 489 goes to 500. Again, if you see them struggling on this process, you could say, all right, 489, we're in the hundreds. So what hundreds are we in between? We're in between 400 and 500. So we know halfway, our midpoint would be 450. So if 489 fall on this side or this side. Okay, well, 80 is bigger than 50, so 489 would fall on this side, so it would be closer for it to get to 500. So sometimes just drawing it out will help them. For 757, they look at what's in the hundreds place. Some of them are going to need to write down the different hundreds, 700 to 800. That'll help some of them as well if you just need to figure out what hundred you're in between. So the 7 looks over at the 5, and the 5 is 5 or more, raise the score. So 5 tells 7 to raise up to an 8. Then everything else becomes a 0. So it goes up. So 757 rounds to 800. All right, so in all of these, 872, that would be, we're between 800 and 900. The 8 is in the hundreds place, looks at the 7. 7 says raise the score. It's going to raise up to 900. So 252, we're in between 200 and 300. Again, writing that helps some of them just to kind of step through the process. We're looking in the hundreds. We go next door and see the 5. The 5 tells the 2 to raise up to a 3. We're at 300. So they're just going through each of these and rounding them to the nearest 100. 2 more over here. So this will round to 600. Okay, and this is the only time you'll see any kind of changes because we have a 9 in the hundreds. The 6 tells them to raise up. Well, a 9 raises to a 10, then everything becomes a 0. So we just created 1,000. This one rounds to 1,000. So then they just had to connect all of their different robots to what they rounded to. Just a look ahead, once we get rounding to the nearest hundreds down, then we're going to have numbers, and we have to do rounding to the nearest 10 and the nearest 100. So that will look something like this. If I have 717 and I round it to the nearest 10, and I need to round it to the nearest 100. So that would be here doing what we have been working on last week. I'm rounding to the nearest 10. I'm worried about the tens place, and I'm looking right next door. 7 says raise the score, so this is 720 when I'm rounding to the nearest 10. But when I'm rounding to the nearest 100, I'm only worried about the hundreds place. So the hundreds looks right next door and sees a 1, and the 1 tells it to rest, and everything else becomes a 0. So round to the nearest 10 and round to the nearest 100. By the end of the week, we'll want them to be able to take a number and do both.